Of course, we need to focus, to concentrate, and to dig deep. But can we benefit from changing our focus? Timelines have an important place in our study of history, but I would hate to think that we would come away from a history class with only a study of this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and so on. You may have seen shows on TV or YouTube where random people are interviewed about history. They're asked seemingly basic, simple questions, and we can be amused by their answers, but we really should be shocked and saddened by how many people miss these basic facts. And I would bet the majority of those people studied the same events in a traditional classroom environment using a traditional timeline. It's so easy to forget the sequence of a timeline. I believe timelines really do have an important role in learning, but as a reference tool, not by itself as the ultimate goal. Maybe we need to try a different approach. I mean, if a timeline isn't working, let's try something else. I really like student-led studies. As I mentioned before, I'm a piano teacher. Recently, I was thinking back about a student from some years ago. One of the songs in his very traditional lesson book was a boogie-woogie style song. He loved it. He practiced and was excited and truly mastered the song. You could easily see and hear his enthusiasm. It was great. Then we finished the song, turned the page, and the next one wasn't boogie-woogie, just something more traditional like a waltz or something. He was incredibly bored. I said, "Dude, what happened? You were doing so well and you were practicing so much." He just looked at me and said, "I don't like this one. It doesn't interest me." Ooh. I said, "Well, what should we do?" Well, he smiled a shy little grin and said, "Could you find me another boogie-woogie song?" You bet I did. And his practice resumed, and off we went. Now, I could have just gone on and plowed through the book and turned the page and keep going. Well, boogie-woogie is a great way to develop left-hand technique, but there are many other, more traditional ways to do that too. So what we ended up doing was supplementing the traditional lesson book with every level appropriate boogie-woogie song I could find. And I will tell you, I got really, really tired of boogie-woogie. But that's okay. He didn't. And he was practicing and enthused and improving and eventually growing into a very well-rounded musician. Not too long ago, I interviewed Richard Dowling. I'll include the video of that interview for you. It's talking about Richard Dowling's recordings of Scott Joplin. In that video, you'll hear that Richard's journey was not unlike that of my young student. And listen to the amazing results that you can get from finding the music that brings you the most joy to practice. I think you can see the application here for history class too. If you're finishing up a chapter or a lesson or a unit study on some topic that your student enjoys, and then they turn the page and the next one leaves them cold, it's going to be very difficult to get them to invest their time and energy on that new topic. I'm not saying that the topic might not be an important one. I'm saying that we might need to change the order we introduce things. We might need to change focus. Try a different topic that interests your students, and then circle back around. Or you could continue studying that topic that interests your student. Dig even deeper. You know, when I think of the historians I know, the professional writers and professors that I have the privilege of calling my friends, every one of them has a very specific area of expertise, some topic for which they are very well known. One friend seems to know every little detail about a specific region. Another has focused primarily on the first ladies of America. Another is known for her expertise of the history of the education system in America, but specifically just the early 20th century. Did these people and others gain more knowledge than their one area of expertise? Of course they did. But they found the thing that interested them most and went for it. Every Maestro Heights lesson or course has a section that says, "Where do we go from here?" This particular one is from the Ferris wheel. Let's say you've just finished this unit and your student is curious about the person who is credited with inventing it. Okay, then let's study the biography of George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. Or perhaps they're interested about other inventions that debuted at the 1893 World's Fair, so we could learn about the zipper. Or maybe they, like me, are generally fascinated with the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, and they're wondering what else happened at about that time. Then a study of Scott Joplin or Buffalo Bill would be great. Joplin couldn't participate in the fair because of his race. Buffalo Bill tried to get into the fair, but they wouldn't let him because his act was considered inappropriate. So he set up his Wild West, quite literally, across the street from the fair and did a big box office. Now for our example, let's say you chose Scott Joplin. After you study his biography, you might be interested in the unit about him called Politics and Opera. Yeah, Scott Joplin wrote opera, and his first opera was about the time that Theodore Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington to dinner. This was the first time a man of color was invited dinner guest at the White House. The story goes on from there. So do I use timelines? Only as reference material to put a topic into history. For instance, I could use a timeline to describe myself as being born when Laura Ingalls Wilder was still alive, and there were only 48 states in these United States. We tend to think of timelines as being linear, from point A to point B. Time does march on, but history also circles back around. We are all connected to everyone else in our present world and throughout history. In Maestro Heights, we study people, why they did what they did, and where and how did they do it. Our personal connection to history is the people. There are people just like us, fears, triumphs, tragedies, successes, and failures. And when we begin to understand them as people, not just names and dates, we begin to build a personal connection with them. And only then we can learn from them. Think about your own school days, or ask someone who is done with school. Do you remember reading a particular lesson or textbook? Unless it was significant in some unusual way, you probably don't. I know I sat through a whole bunch of class sessions and read a whole bunch of textbooks, and I can't tell you what most of them were about. But in this session, we'll talk about what we do remember. To this very day, if I ask my grade school classmates if they remember our field trip to the Wonder Bread Bakery, they will tell you that they do, and how wonderful the bread smelled. If you ask someone if they remember the time the class took a field trip to a farm or aquarium or wherever, it is likely that they do. At the very least, they'll remember more about that day than most of the other daily days of school. Field trips are unique opportunities to make memories and learn some things. Since most people will forget what the book says, but will remember the field trip, we need to make sure to make it count. Take advantage of the novelty of a field trip. Use those trips to intentionally incorporate the concepts that you're studying. A field trip is not a vacation day. It is not a day away from learning. It is learning in a different location. A trip to a working farm would make a wonderful field trip for our unit on the Daughters of Liberty and how they use the spinning wheel as the symbol of political protest. In that unit, we have video demonstrations of a spinning wheel and a drop spindle. By now, you know that I jump at the chance to have one subject lead to another. So if we're going to learn about spinning, then we should learn about wool and then about yarn. A lot of people really don't know where such things come from. It's not just a matter of going to the store to buy it. We need to learn from the sheep to the spinning to the fabric to the manufacture of clothes and the many steps in between. It might not seem obvious at first, but once you think about it, it's easy to see how seeing sheep at a farm can easily lead to a discussion of wool and yarn and thread, and how that leads into the conversation about the Daughters of Liberty and how they made fabric and used it as a sign of political protest. Another type of field trip might be to a museum, where things might appear to be a little more structured. It depends greatly on the museum, but sometimes it can be trickier to get the kids involved because it may not seem as hands-on. A whole lot of look but don't touch. But more and more museums are making exhibits much more accessible and interactive, and that's very good news for all of us. There are some steps you should take to get the very most out of your field trip. If you're going to a location that is used to having children or school groups, check and see if they have any handouts or study guides or lesson plans for you to download and use to prepare for the trip, to use during the trip, and even follow up after the trip. These steps to field trip success can apply to many types of locations and historic sites. But just to make things a little easier in our time together, I'm going to lump them all together and call them museums for now, even though I know not all of them are. Before your trip, look over any materials that are available to you. If there's a specific topic, era, industry, or person, do some basic teaching to help your students understand how this fits into history. For example, if you're going to the Truman Presidential Museum, your students should know a bit about Truman before they arrive, so they will appreciate the things that they see. Set things up for your students to be successful. Arrange for success. If you can find any information about your destination that includes photos, use that to your advantage. Find a specific artifact or two and talk about it. Make it a kind of scavenger hunt for your students. And when they find it, they will remember what they've already learned about it. Here's an odd example. Let's say you're going to visit the childhood home of William F. Cody, more commonly known as Buffalo Bill. In the sewing room there's a pin cushion that's made from a buffalo hoof. Regardless of how odd or weird we might find that, it is memorable and can be used as a springboard to discuss about what happened to the millions of bison that once roamed our prairies. Scavenger hunts can be great ways to get students involved with the displays. As your students get older, it's not going to be enough to simply ask them to find the item. You may need to craft questions about the displays, comparing one thing to another. How did they draw these conclusions? Be sure to take lots of photos of your students during that field trip. Photos can be used as memory prompts, both right away, but also for years into the future. After the trip, and the sooner the better, put it all together. One idea might be to ask the students to make their own museum display or gallery based on what they saw and learned. You can always ask what they like best, but be sure to ask why. Pursue the why if you need to. Because it was cool, or I thought it was weird, are not adequate answers. Use I wonder statements to continue the conversation. I wonder if the ladies who used that pin cushion ever thought about the animal that it came from. I wonder if they ate the meat from the animal that it came from. There are a lot of ways to check for understanding, and we'll be talking about more of them in future sessions.